Publishers, which was part of Macmillan Publishers, and W.H. Freeman was a smaller, privately held, family held, but the von Holtzbrinck family of publishers company. I've worked for Wiley, which is publicly traded, but the majority shareholders are Wiley family members, and they were very actively involved in the publishing program. I've worked for Oxford University Press, which is obviously the biggest university press in the world and a nonprofit. And then now I'm here at Harvard Education Press, which is also a university press and a nonprofit organization. So different types of book publishers have different investments in that bottom line, right? Depending on whether or not they are for-profit or nonprofit or publicly traded or privately held. But then there are also all kinds of different publishers represented by university presses. Harvard Education Press is a good example. Oxford University Press, another very good example. There are trade publishers that publish more for general readers. Those are the kinds of books you will always find in every bookstore. They are your HarperCollins, Penguin Random House, those kinds of publishers. There are academic publishers that focus on very titles that will appeal to academics as well as a broader audience. And university presses are included in that sort of academic publisher environment. And then there are publishers like Routledge, like Rowman and Littlefield that are also focused in that a slightly more academic environment. Then there are textbook publishers like Pearson and Cengage. Those are a couple of the real biggies. Then there are publishers that focus on the K-12 audience like Scholastic. And then there is self-publishing, which is gaining in significance in market share, prominence, popularity with authors. You can do a lot self-publishing. And Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing is really the premier self-publishing. And it's very easy, self-publishing arm. So we can go on to the next slide. Yeah, so I really just covered this already. So self-publishing is becoming more and more viable. It's becoming more and more popular. It can be enormously successful. People can have very strong and successful publishing careers working just through self-publishing. When you work through Amazon self-publishing, you have the opportunity to use all the power of their advertising, marketing, all of the power that Amazon puts behind selling books, they also put behind self-publishing. Okay, next slide. The biggest and most important component, I think, of getting your book published into the market, into readers' hands, is being very, very clear about defining what your book is about. So if you're publishing, I see the question, isn't self-publishing looked down on by academia? Yes, it does not hold the same standards in academic world as it does in the world of general readership and fiction. But if you're writing fiction and you're struggling to get a work published, I actually recommend self-publishing as an option because you can get the exposure and capture significant market share by doing that. But very good question. Okay, so define what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. If you are writing something that is nonfiction or academic, what is the problem that you are trying to solve? What is the value proposition? What will readers take away from your book that they can't get anywhere else? It's really important for you as an author to define and hone that message. And it's really important for that to be very clearly communicated to a publisher. What are you doing and how is it different? If you're publishing in the world of nonfiction, what evidence do you have to back up what you're doing? Research basis, feedback from colleagues, interest from the community. Those are all things that are really important to have behind you, backing you up when you're taking a proposal to a publisher. If you're writing fiction, what is the story you're trying to tell? Think about the the synopsis, like what would the back cover copy on your book look like? Help really define the message of what your book and how is it intriguing, and what does it have to offer? Somebody asked the question about memoirs. Memoirs fall into that sort of general trade category, and they can absolutely be self-published if that was a question related to that. I'll talk a little bit more about fiction and agents in a little bit. And do self-published books get reviewed by, say, the New York Times, the New York Review of Books, etc.? Generally, no, but can't even take a wild guess. How many books of the vast number of books that are published in any given month get reviewed by the New York Times or the New York Review of Books? If that is your goal, to have that level of an audience, you want to go with a highly respected publisher of any kind, a highly respected academic publisher or a highly respected trade publisher. Yes, beware of publishing scams. Very good. What about art and poetry? Those are very, very highly competitive publishing markets. Usually university presses, there are lots of university presses that specialize in art and poetry. Art is a very expensive discipline in which to publish. So a university press can usually offer an investment in that kind of thing if it is contributing to the field. Poetry I hate to say this because I love to write poetry myself, but poetry doesn't sell unless you're like Mary Oliver, right? So those sales are very limited, which is why university presses tend to publish a lot of poetry, and in poetry journals that they publish as well, because the mission of a university press is to put things into the world that your traditional publishers, for-profit publishers, can't afford to offer. Okay, let's go to the next slide. There are lots of, I'm really glad there are questions. So thinking about your audience, really narrowing in on who your book is for. So are you writing for a young adult readership? Are you writing for high school teachers? Are you writing for general readers? Are you writing a children's book? Are you writing for academics? And then you can get super specific under each of these categories. And I just went super specific here so you could see what I mean. If you're writing for academics, are you writing for community college instructors or for four-year institutions? Are you writing at the graduate level or the undergraduate level? Are you writing for people who teach physics? Are you actually writing for people who teach calculus-based introductory physics? Like, you can get very, very specific about who your audience is, and that makes it easier for a publisher to identify who they are going to target with your book. So if you're writing poetry, are you writing poetry that's in the style of Mary Oliver, or are you writing poetry that's more in the style of Sylvia Plath? Like, that helps. Every bit of information you can provide helps a publisher understand where to fit your title on their list. Okay, next slide. Feedback. Gathering and accepting feedback is terrifying, challenging, and difficult to work with for so many authors. But gathering and accepting feedback is also a gold mine. You really should take advantage of every bit of feedback that you can get as you're going through your writing process. So, and your feedback should really be from your target audience. So if you're writing a book for that introductory physics teacher, you really want introductory physics teachers to look at it, not somebody who's a brilliant poet, right? You really want to have very relevant direct feedback. You can gather your own feedback, and that will help inform your writing. Publishers may also do that. I'm going to get to the sharing question in a second. Thank you for that. Editors will, depending on the kind of publishing you are interested in and the subject matter of your publishing endeavor, your editor may gather peer reviews or reviews from the target market. Here's what I have to say about feedback. I know I just said get as much as you can, and it's so valuable, and accept it, like set your ego aside, really listen to it. It's so hard to do that. But the other thing that I have to say is incredibly important is don't let the reviewer feedback sway you from your mission, your passion. So often I see a scenario where an author gets feedback from, 5 people who might be part of their target audience. And each of those 5 people has very specific feedback, and very different feedback. So one person might say, I really think you need to add a chapter on X. And another person will say, well, you've totally neglected the work or the contributions of so-and-so. And then as an author, you're thinking, I need to accept feedback and I need to work with the feedback, but it's very easy to get derailed and to start veering in a direction that strays from your straight line path and your vision. And that is the death knell for a book project. A book has to incorporate feedback and respond to feedback and work with feedback without losing its heart. And the heart of a project is your vision for your book, and don't stray from that. I think it's just a really important advice. And let me just go back to the questions here. Does sharing chapters or sections on social media make it less likely to get published? Depends on how you do it and where you're doing it and when you're doing it. I think sharing chapters on or sections on social media can help develop an audience and if a publisher will do their homework and they will go and look you up. And if they find your work online and see that 300 people have commented and said how exciting this is, that's a reader base right there. So that's great. You just want to be careful about how much and where, and overexposing it and exposing too much of it, because there's always the risk that somebody will steal your idea, right? And you do not want that. Okay, hold on, I have to scroll up on this. What have I missed? Is there a problem with reviewers possibly taking your work as their own? There's so many risks everywhere. There's the risk that once your book gets published, it will get pirated and distributed for free all over the internet. Publishers have ways. We have a firm that takes down any of our work that it appears in violation of copyright online. The point is that it's just always a risk and you have to be careful. In general, when publishers commission reviews, there is sort of a shared assumption that this is not to be shared or taken in any way. And there are ways of identifying plagiarism. There's all kinds of software that will identify these things. So it is a risk, but it is not without. I think it's more valuable to do it than not. Does publishing fiction make it harder to publish nonfiction academic? No, I don't think so. I think an experienced author and a published author is always seen as an asset to a publisher, somebody who's already published, because there's a proven audience if the sales have been reasonable. What are your thoughts on using Substacks? I actually do not have any experience on Substack. I don't have anything to offer there. I'm really sorry, but if you do, post more on the chat about it. I'm sure the audience would really like to hear more about that. 2 colleagues have given me very different feedback. How do I follow the one I agree with most without alienating the other? I think that you have to make it clear that you are following. I think people who provide feedback understand that you may or may not take their feedback, right? That should be part of the setting expectations at the beginning of the process. I want your feedback and information. I'm going to incorporate it with all the other feedback and information I get and make strategic decisions about what I want to accept and what I'm not going to accept, and working with it. So I think especially this is a longtime friend, you thank them profusely for offering you feedback and how grateful you are, and you're taking their comments into consideration. We have an editor from Scholastic on here. I can't see who you are, but hello. Yes, you need to write the book you need to write. And that in balance with, you need to write the book that we can sell. It's exactly right. That is the whole, I think that's that you've just summed up in two lovely sentences, the point of the whole presentation. Thank you for that. Okay, next slide. The feedback part is really, really important and helps you develop your ideas. And then once you really have a sense of what it is that you're writing, in fiction, often usually you have to have a whole work together. You can't just sort of go to a publisher with a chapter. In academics, you can go to a publisher with a proposal and a chapter. I'll talk a little bit more about fiction later, but putting together a proposal is like the distillation of all the knowledge you have about what you're doing and what your expectations are and how you want to work with a publisher. So when you're writing a proposal, which is what you would do if you're thinking about a textbook or a book for the K-12 market or an academic title, or a title that crosses over that sort of academic university press line, the sort of Rowman and Littlefield kind of book. When you're doing that, you really need to think about, you're sort of approaching things a little bit differently. I sort of lost track of where I was going there, but a proposal versus an inquiry letter. So a proposal is a summation of your project, and most publishers have a proposal guidelines on their website, and you can download. We have them on our website. Most of them are very similar. Feel free to go to our website or any other publisher's website and track down their guidelines. And usually they ask for things like a book description. They ask for the evidence base. They ask for the intended target audience, anything you might know about the market and market size. Those are the big things that in general everybody will ask for. I always ask as well for like the elevator pitch. How can you sum up your project and the value of that project in, 3 minutes talking to me or 5 sentences on a piece of paper? What are you doing that is new and different? What is that problem you are trying to solve? What is the story you are trying to sell? When you're writing a letter of inquiry, if you are working on a piece of fiction that you would like to have published, it's the process is a little bit different. And I will continue to talk about that. But what you usually do in publishing fiction is send your manuscript and a letter of inquiry to a publisher if you're not working through an agent. And I think I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. But that in that case, your inquiry letter needs to provide a basic description of the book. I like to see what would you imagine the back cover copy to be, because that's the grabber, right? When you're in a bookstore, you go to the bookstore, you flip over the book, read a little bit about what it's about, and that tells you whether or not you're going to buy it, right? As a publisher, I want to see that. So let's go to the next slide. I think that talks about yes, here we go. So what do you do with your proposal or your letter of inquiry? Who publishes books like yours? How do you know what publishers to approach? Do you need an agent? Should you consider self-publishing? So I would say the most important thing is to not just go wide and target everybody under the sun, but to really identify other publishers that are publishing works like your work. So if you're writing a young adult novel that is fantasy and really targets kids who play Dungeons and Dragons, right? Who else is publishing? Who's out there is publishing that kind of work? They're the ones who are most likely to want something like that again, right? Because they're establishing themselves in that corner of the market. So you can help them establish themselves in that market. So always think from the publisher's perspective, what are they getting from you? How are you helping them and their list of titles? Do you need an agent? You need an agent typically if you're publishing in fiction or big market general readership areas. At university presses, we tend not to work with agents. If you're doing textbook publishing, don't work with agents. I'm pretty sure Scholastic, can our Scholastic editor weigh in on that? You would not necessarily need an agent if you're doing educational materials. Maybe if you're doing something more sort of general readership. And if you're going to work with an agent, I'm scrolling down. Oh, sorry, I missed a whole bunch of comments. I'll come back. If you are working with an agent, it's the same, you need to follow the same practice of really identifying agents who work in the same area. So you want, and if you're publishing a work for people who are interested in stamp collecting, you need to find an agent who has also worked with authors getting their books on stamp collecting published. So it's always knowing who your audience is and who is addressing it. It's like putting all those pieces together. And should you consider self-publishing? A lot of people consider self-publishing as an act of last resort, which is totally fine. I had a friend who just published a science fiction book, and he sent it to, I think he said 80 different publishers, and got didn't get responses from, some people wanted to see the manuscript. He sent it, like he didn't get very many responses, and he wasn't offered a contract, and he went to self-publishing, and he's doing really, really well that way. So you could consider it an act of last resort, or you can just go there. I have another friend who just published a book on how to help your high school student get into college level sports, get onto a college level sports team. Great book. She self-published it, and it's doing great. Okay, hold on. Here we go. I'm going to go back and look at some of these. Anyone working on publishing poetry, books of essays who'd like to be, oh, great. That's really nice. Thank you for sharing that. What about using AI to help gather references? I recommend against it because it's unreliable, and it's actually notorious for misciting references. It's invented Supreme Court cases, for example, that never happened, didn't exist, and put them in, suggested them as citations. So you can use it as a starting point. Somebody here is saying that. You definitely, AI in general is a tool for writing and working on ideas and concepts, I think is great. There's no reason you shouldn't just sort of generate ideas. It's like having a conversation with yourself, right? But don't count on it. Okay, next. Oh, do you have sample proposals to look at? If you are interested in academic publishing or university press publishing, I do have a couple of sample proposals I can share, but it's really targeted for that particular market. So if you're interested, my email address will show up at the very end, and feel free to reach out. Where's the best place to find an editor for memoir, nonfiction, narrative? I think for anything, there are lots of, this is going to sound really dated. I think you can still go to a bookstore and there's lists of publishers and agents. You can Google publishers and agents and find I can't tell you the best place to find an editor ever, and I can't tell you what defines a best editor. A best editor is going to be the person that you work with well. And I think that if you're writing a memoir about growing up in the 1940s, for example, you just want to find somebody who has experience there, and somebody who has published in a similar area. Shorter articles, pieces like articles and reports. Articles, I can't tell you about reports. I don't really have the experience there, but we also publish a journal. It's really the same process for publishing journal articles that it is for publishing a book. You have to provide a proposal to the journal editors. Sometimes journal editors reach out to you and see if you're interested in writing, but it's a very, very similar process and goes through peer review, all of that kind of thing. And just identify the journals or magazines or whatever that you're interested in, and that share similar publishing, standards and goals, and work with them. I'm going to talk about contracts coming up. I can definitely put the link or send everything to Lisa, and she can send it later. I'll talk about contracts later. Scholastic does not work with agents. That's what I suspected. Books with lots of art. That is a really good question. And every publisher handles it a little bit differently. For example, here, we do not publish 4-color art. We don't publish 4-color books. So any piece of art has to be black and white, which keeps the cost down. And for our books, there's really no like pedagogical or learning value in having 4-color. So that's how we think about things. I used to work on science textbooks where there's 5-color art, tons of it. Those books can cost $500,000 in pre-press costs because of art programs and media programs. I think that it's not a positive or a negative, it's a discussion point with the publisher. You have to say, this book, I'm planning a book that has a bunch of art. Is that something you'd be willing to do? Or would that be, it depends on the book and the publisher. Okie doke. Oh, I love that your grandson has written stories. And that again, it's like finding the publisher, identify the publisher that publishes similar kinds of works and start sending letters and examples. Okay, I'm going to come back to questions. Let's go through another couple of slides and then I'll come back to and somebody said writer's market from your local library. I knew it was still existed, but you could also do a lot of this hunting online. Okay, part of getting published is selling the concept of your book and the idea of your book and really understanding what it's about and who it's for. Part of it is selling yourself as an author. I will tell you that if I have the choice between signing an author who has written a really good book that has a lot of potential, but has 0 social media presence and connections, versus somebody who has a really good book that I think has great potential and has a vast social network and is fully prepared to help market and sell the book when it comes out, I'm going with the one with the social network. I really am. Sounds a little bit gross, but we have to sell the books we publish, right? So what I am looking for in an author, what publishers are generally looking for in authors is authors who have a clear understanding of that target audience and have thoughts and ideas about how to reach it. People who have a expansive social media presence is a huge plus, because then we can tap into your networks to help sell and distribute the book. Authors who have prior publications and which have been successful are also a huge draw. And I know that's a horrible thing to say. It's like when you're 22 and looking for your first job and you can't get hired because you don't have experience, right? It's exactly the same boat. But when a prospective author who has published 1 or 2 other books that have performed reasonably well on the market comes with a book idea, that's one that a publisher will look twice at, no matter what. Professional affiliations. So if you're a poet and you are a member of, I don't know, the board for the LSU Press's Poetry Journal, like that's great. You've got a built-in audience right there for me. I highly recommend LSU's Southern Review Poetry Journal for the poets out there. So having those kinds of professional affiliations helps. A willingness and an ability to sort of have a media presence is also huge. Like if you have connections to media people, or you're very willing to do media appearances. Some people are not, and that's totally fine and understandable, but that is a plus from a publisher's perspective. Somebody who has a very sort of, what we're looking for, somebody who can have a very positive public-facing experience with possible readers. And then I think it's really important. I've been most impressed by proposals that include a section on what the author can do to help the title be successful once it publishes. That is not currently in our proposal guidelines, but I think I'm going to make it part of our proposal guidelines. Because several proposals have come in recently where the author has said, well, I plan to do I know that I can line up appearances at these 3 bookstores as soon as the book publishes. I have a social media presence. I have 3,000 followers on X. I will be doing blasts in promoting my book before publication and after publication. Those are all really, really important. Okay, next slide. So there's the side that is you have to sell yourself to a publisher, but don't forget that it's going to be a two-way street here, right? And you really need to have a partnership that's going to work for you. So working with a publisher, it's a very intimate relationship, right? You're a writer and it's very vulnerable putting your writing out there. There has to be a level of trust and understanding. I think one thing to keep in mind too is people sometimes sign up with an editor they really like, and then, editors come and go and move jobs and move to another publishing house. You may not work with the same editor for the entire time you're going through the publishing process, but you need to feel confident in the support that you're going to get from the editorial team and the publishing house. So even if your editor leaves, you feel confident that you'll be put into good hands. So that's important too. And you should definitely be looking for and asking about what their marketing and publicity plans are around their titles. Publishers in general have been scaling back marketing and publicity and relying more on authors to help with that. So you want to know what the publisher is going to contribute. You're willing to contribute. What are they going to add? And then, maybe you don't want a close relationship with your publisher. Maybe you just want somebody who can help you go through the mechanics of getting this into print and out. And that's fine too. Just know what you want going into the process. Okay, next slide. Aha, okay, so maybe this will answer some of the contract questions. There's a lot to consider if you are lucky enough to have multiple publishers interested in your work. That is such a rare occurrence, but I wish it for everyone. Things to think about. Lots of people are swayed by what a publisher can offer in terms of a royalty rate and advances on royalties. That is really, in my mind, royalties and advances are not everything. For some people, they are everything, and I totally respect that. But most publishers have ceilings on the amount of what royalties they can offer. Most publishers are no longer offering advances unless you're a big shot and they really expect huge sales from your title. And remember, advances you have to pay back, right? So those are deducted out of your royalty statement. So it's not really like a gift, it's just upfront money. So if upfront money is important to you, then go for it. Royalties and advances are really determined by publishers by the sales potential they see for a title. When I started in publishing, we were offering royalty rates as high as 17%. Today, that is absolutely unheard of. Most publishers say we will offer you 7 or 8% royalty rate. And there's not a lot of wiggle room there. So that's something like, don't be totally hung up on royalties and advances. So another thing in thinking about who you want to publish with is what kind of a presence they have in the market that you're publishing in. It's a little bit dangerous and scary to be the only author of a young adult work for a publisher that is really prevalent in the adult fiction market, right? You are going to be their test case. So you just want to know what their presence is in the market that you're entering. But that's all about your homework in the beginning, right? Who is publishing books like yours? What is the reputation of the press overall? That can be a consideration, particularly if you're doing academic publishing. That is of interest to you. Who is highly respected in your field? Most sort of academic and university presses publish across a diversity of fields. At Harvard Education Press, we do not. We only publish in education. And we have a really good reputation in publishing in the education field. But there are other university presses whose strengths are, say, art history and not necessarily medieval history. So you just have to think about the reputation in the field, how much attention you want and how much attention you will get, how collaborative is the process going to be, trusting your team. And then I come back again to royalties and advances are not everything. So don't get stuck there. Okay, next. Contract stuff. Okay, yeah, and I have a disclaimer at the start of this slide because I'm a publisher, so maybe like what I'm going to tell you is very slightly biased. So there's not usually a lot of wiggle room in those royalty rates and advances rates. I would say always ask. It's like negotiating, trying to get an increase in your salary, right? You would be remiss not to ask for what you want. Important things when you're at the contract stage are to make very sure that you're clear about what your deadlines are, that they're stated and that they're achievable for you. Also know how often royalties are paid and when that is. It's just an important thing to know. Some publishers pay royalties twice a year, most do. Some pay once a year, we pay once a year. Also make sure you know exactly how your royalties are, what your royalty rates are and how they're going to be paid for ebooks, for paperback, for hardback. Hardly anybody does hardback anymore, but for ebook and paper and audiobooks or any other format. If you are really interested in the royalty rate, one way to negotiate is to request a royalty escalator. What that means is that they say, we can't pay you, offer you anything higher than a 7% royalty rate. And you say, okay, how about you pay me 7% royalty, but once I hit 5,000 copies sold, then my royalty will escalate to 10%. And that's much more palatable for publishers because the whole process is a mutual risk, right? You're investing all this time in writing and making your book. The publisher is investing a lot of resources in like the design, layout, actually creating the book and marketing and selling it. Royalties is, if you ask for an escalator, you're saying, I'm not going to ask for more money unless this book is really successful. And that's a much easier pill to swallow. Okay, let's keep going. And then I'm going to try and get to all the questions. Yeah, so this is really important one. It's really, really easy to get discouraged when you're trying to get published. And I know many of you said you had tried to get published, you're interested in being published. It's really not easy. It's a huge challenge. And I just wanted to like offer some, there are brilliant writers out there who really struggle. Stephen King got rejected 30 times with Carrie. Louisa May Alcott was told to stick to teaching. I love this Tony Hillerman one, like get rid of the Indian stuff. Really? That's what his books are. There are just so many examples of authors who struggle for years and years and years to get their projects accepted. And that's the way it works a lot of the time. And you have to be persistent or creative or flexible. And that's again, why I sort of think the self-publishing option, especially if you're publishing outside of academics and textbooks, is a really good route to take because you know you can get your work into the world. Okay, what's my next slide? Then if you are lucky and you get a contract and you're now an author, you absolutely have to take that time and just feel great about it because that is a huge deal and a huge accomplishment. But you always have to be thinking about what are the next steps and what am I going to do to make this book successful? So I've written, or I'm in the process of writing this really important work. And then you really want it to get into people's hands, right? You want your message to reach an audience. And the first year of publication of a title is absolutely critical. Most publishers gauge the success of a title based on first year sales. So we evaluate every one of our titles when it has been in the market for 12 months. And that's how we define the success of a book. Has it's hit the benchmarks that we use to define success. So you have this window to really drive the success of your book. And I would say that window has to start 6 months prior to publication and extend for a year after it actually is a published work. So that's the subject for a whole nother webinar, I think, like what to do when you have a contract. But it is something to be keeping in mind, because I think there is this temptation to be like, oh, I have a contract, now I just have to finish the book and get it out there. It is a really long-term process, and you have to be invested in all those stages for it to be successful. And then I think my next slide is just questions. So I can scroll through the chat and see what other, can I recommend a very good freelance academic editor? Absolutely. Working with, that's an interesting point. Working with developmental editors can really help authors. There are lots and lots of freelance developmental editors out there. A developmental editor is someone who will work with you on your manuscript development at a macro level. So they are not a copy editor. They are not going to like dot I's and cross T's and correct your grammar. They're going to look at structure and shape and consistency. In fiction, they're going to make sure your storyline is tight and that you haven't introduced a character in chapter 2 that you don't mention again until chapter 12. You know, they're just gonna they're gonna make sure that that all the pieces are fitting together. The pieces that as a writer, you're so busy writing, you're so concentrated on it that you can't see the forest for the trees anymore, right? So developmental editors can be really good to work with. And publishers, I was a developmental editor for years. Publishers used to have big staffs of developmental editors, but that has, they no longer do. Publishers really don't have development staffs anymore. But you can hire really good freelancers to work with you, to help you with that shaping process. You can also, you can hire anyone to do anything, right? You can hire somebody to help you find an agent. You can hire a publicist. You can really get help at all these stages. It doesn't have to be all on your shoulders if that's something that's available to you. Okay, let's see. For a general audience or business audience, what can you share about pricing possibilities? Ooh, so it's so variable. And again, I will come back to what are comparable books? What are books like yours priced at? So if you're writing an introductory physics textbook, you can charge $250 for that. If you are writing a sort of 300-page work of fiction, paperback fiction, you probably can charge $30 for that. As publishers, when we're pricing titles that we publish, we are looking at the competitors and seeing what is a reasonable price range. So it is really, it's really dependent on the market. The market changes a lot all the time. You know, we may find out that we sign a book in 2020 and expect that we can price it at whatever, and then it's 2024 when the book comes out and the price point is totally different. So it changes and it's dependent on the market. Interested in writing children's literature, an idea for stories, artistic talent. Some publishers will provide or suggest artists to work with you. I think you probably have a better bet of finding somebody yourself who does work that you like, that you could include. Publishing in the children's market is very competitive. I think it's probably the most competitive market in publishing to get a signing, or to get signed. So the more complete a picture you can present to the publisher, the better. And I think you will be more successful if you come with an artist in mind and samples of their work. Can you define expansive social media presence? Again, market dependent, right? So if you're writing general readership, I just keep coming back to your audience. So we publish in education. Most of the authors that we have that we consider to have a significant a significant social media presence might have 3,000 followers. But I don't know, go online and see how many followers Stephen King has, right? It is really dependent on who you're trying to reach and what your visibility is. But I think that anytime there's sort of benchmarks, like if you have 500 5-star reviews on Amazon, you're golden. If you have 5,000 social media followers, 2,500 social media followers, you're in good shape. That's a good following, depending on what area, what the market is that you're trying to reach. Can you repeat the name of the poetry journal? Sure, it is the Southern Review out of Louisiana State University Press. It's just one, and Harvard Review is really good too for poetry. There's so many, but those are two of my faves. My reference to 22-year-olds and their first jobs. Yeah. Accomplished and confused, why the best and brightest struggle to achieve career satisfaction. That's great. That sounds, I would like to read that, please. I recently published with Routledge and wonder, are royalty rates higher with academic publishers or similar to those in non-academic publishing? It's changed so much recently. There was a window where textbook publishing had the highest royalty rates out there. It depends on who you are. Like, I'm pretty sure that like a Stephen King is getting a really good royalty rate, right? If you're new to publishing, I think that you typically like 7 to 8% is going to be about what you're going to be offered. It could be lower at some places, it could be 5%, could be a little bit higher someplace. Some places 9%, but the royalty rates have come down significantly. Does that help? It doesn't really help because I didn't really give you an answer, but yeah, it varies. Are publishing contracts standard or completely negotiable, and do you need a lawyer for this? Some publishing contracts are totally standard. Like all of the academic publishing contracts that I've looked at in the last probably 7 years are virtually the same. They may have different clauses giving publisher an out for publishing. They may have different clauses, like new clauses that are going in and aren't everywhere now are related to AI and related to plagiarism. Most of the terms in a contract will be non-negotiable. Typically, you can negotiate things like the royalty rate, the number of advanced copies that you get, due dates for submission. All of those things are negotiable. Do you hold on to your future rights for TV, movie, et cetera? Is it a risk to try to negotiate? That's a good question. And it is, there are lots of times when you actually, it sounds like you're giving up a lot, but you actually want the publisher to negotiate on your behalf. So for example, foreign translations of books, no author wants to have to go through the sort of process of trying to get translation rights and then negotiate the translation rights. And managing copyright. Usually the publisher has the copyright for your work. So TV and movie rights, I would try to negotiate to keep that. But if you can't, you should have I would have a lawyer look at anything. If you think your book has the potential to go to TV or movie rights, I would definitely negotiate with a lawyer. I can't say that you should or shouldn't consult a lawyer. That really is a personal thing. Contracts can be complicated, and if you're not really good at looking at contracts or familiar with looking at contracts, definitely go have a lawyer look at it for you. I think if you have concerns and hesitations and questions, have a lawyer just explain it to you. Publishers will explain things to you, but I'm a publisher. I don't recommend that you trust the publisher to tell you what the limitations are in your contract, because not that any publisher would lie to you intentionally, but we have the opposite interests sometimes from you, and we see a contract from a very different perspective. So it's always a good idea to get expert advice. If we have time for a underdog success story, that would be super fun. Let me see if there are any other, if you want royalties, self-publish on Amazon. Yep. So there's another person. Does Amazon pay royalties, or do you get a % of sales that is higher than royalties? I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but yes, you do get royalties. And I don't think there's any negotiation on that with Amazon, but I can't remember. So I'm not totally clear. How does the publishing process take? Once your book is signed, depending on what kind of book it is, usually 9 months to a year is a very reasonable schedule with a publisher. Once the final manuscript is delivered. So a lot of that schedule is up to you. When are you going to turn over a final manuscript? And then once the final manuscript is in publisher's hands, it takes 9 months to a year. How does it work if you're editing? Yes, you share royalties. So that is all established in the contract. But the authors have to negotiate who's going to get what royalties, and then the publisher will put that mutually agreed upon division into the contract. Yes, it's being sent, being recorded. How polished? Very polished. So the question was, how polished do you expect good proposals? Yeah, I want them to be totally polished. And the truth is that we will work with authors to do further polishing on proposals we think are a good investment for us, but most publishers will not. Most publishers take your proposal and that's it. So yeah, do it well. Freelance editors, generally $50 an hour. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. There's a huge range and variety, but I would think $50 an hour is fairly standard. Social media following need to be the same audience that your book would be for. Not necessarily, include other people, but yes, it's really good if you can say, I have 2,000 followers and 1,500 of them are in the field in which I'm publishing. Good publicists, and there are great publicity firms, there are great individual publicists. Go online, I think. Do you think the Harvard affiliation helps when publishing? I absolutely do. I know we only have 1 more minute. Yes, it definitely helps. It is brand awareness built in. Who owns the copyright of published work? The publisher, in like 95% of the cases. Do I have time, Lisa, or should we wrap it up?
I was just gonna jump in here, Jess. If you want, we can go a few minutes over for folks who can stay on. But okay. I just wanted to make sure that I reemphasize what Emily put into the chat, that we will be sending out a follow-up email next week with Jess's information as well as a link to this recording. So don't feel like you are missing out on answering or asking your questions or getting your answers now, or that you won't be able to see the recording later. That will be available next week.
Yeah, and my email is right there. Feel free to email me if you have questions I can help with. Yeah, should I just answer a few more questions? Or I'm so grateful to all of you for coming. Thank you. This was so much fun to do this with you all. And I hope it was helpful. And if there's anything else that I can help with, just let me know.
I think we're going to need a part 2, Jess.
Sounds good to me. I'm in. Good.
Awesome. All right. Well, Jess, thank you so much. This was fantastic. And thank you all so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And everyone, happy publishing and writing.